My name is Jay Wegman, and I have the privilege of being the director of the Skirball Center, which is presenting the Builders Association's fabulous production of I Agreed to the Terms. I'm here just simply to welcome three people right now, though we'll be joined with others. Marianne Weems, who is the founder and artistic director of Builders Association. She's also the major force behind I Agree to the Terms. James Gibbs, who is the dramaturg and another associate with Builders Association, and Clay Shirky, who is an all-around good guy who I'm actually going to read this. He's the vice provost for educational technology at NYU. And he's a professor in both journalism and at the interactive telecommunications program at Tisch. And he is also a former colleague of the Builders Association. So this is going to be a lively conversation. I welcome you. I thank everyone for joining us, and I'm looking forward to this. Have fun.
Thank you, Jim.
Hi.
So I guess I'll start because I saw the show Sunday night, and that particularly the opening section. I don't know if everyone who's logged in has seen it yet, but the opening section brings back a bunch of the early conversation from the text-only internet before things even got visual. Forget video, before there was even really graphic user interfaces in the web. And it was startling to me, I have to say, how much it felt like listening to ragtime while like flipping through sepia tone photos. I mean, I came in the early 90s when a bunch of those conversations were still relatively live, and yet seeing this for the first time really set it off as like, oh, this is being excavated, right? This is not material that's being, it's in lively circulation in the culture, and we're talking about it. And then I had this other sense, I kind of sort of like that projecting into the future around the metaverse section, around that bit at the end where there really is an active conversation, but there's not really a lot of facts on the ground yet. There's a bunch of rhetoric around the metaverse, but it's not yet enough a lived experience, I think, for people to be able to line it up with their own, their own lived sensibilities of life online or whatever. And those two things, when I was thinking back, Marianne, about the performance afterwards, those two kind of bringing back the relatively distant past and then projecting into this kind of, I mean, from my point of view, nightmarish, but this kind of future that's being imagined for us. The Turkers section, the section that was really kind of beautifully framed by those like past and future, which is, this is the lived reality right now for a lot of people using the network. And the fascinating thing to me about the just even the framing of the Turkers section was the Mechanical Turk came along, I forget exactly when it appears, but about 10 years ago, I'm guessing.
2005.
2005. Okay, so longer than that, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was part of the conversation in an incredibly animated way. Gig economy, global economy, outsourcing. What does all this mean? And then that stuff just went away, but Mechanical Turk did not. And one of the things I loved about it was not just first-person testimonial from people who'd done Mechanical Turk, which is a common enough, journalistic trope in those days, but like, here they are, like, these are just people who do this for a living, and they're way better at it than you are. And that part of it really struck me because it was a part of the same internet I use going on hammer and tongs live right now, and something that was utterly invisible to me until you all kind of lifted it up and said, no, look at this. This is part of the present. And that past, present, future time structure really, I thought it was fantastic. And I thought it really set off that central section. So I guess I'll ask you, what sort of conversations were you all having about time and framing as all of this was, as the piece was coming together?
Well, thanks, Clay. I want to just quickly amend Jay's little introduction by saying that Clay and I actually worked at the Worcester Group together. It wasn't even at the Builders Association. So ancient history.
Back in the day, yes.
Yeah, speaking of BBS. So, and James, I want to invite you to please help me out here because
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant thinker in terms of structure. I'm just going to dive into one minor detail, which is, this sense of like, I guess, community that clearly was part of the BBS, that, the utopian moment, and has in many ways just been, dragged through the mud currently. But because we worked on this project for so long with these specific Turkers, it practically has become a kind of community. I mean, speaking of theater, this has been a very process-based project. And because we started before the pandemic, I mean, Sybil and I have been talking for like 3 or 4 years, but then during the pandemic, it was like, of course, we're going to keep doing this, not because it's online theater, but because these people are online. It's already an existing, it's not like we had to fabricate doing the cherry orchard on Zoom, right? It's still part of this, the content and the form are matched. Right. So that has been really interesting in terms of creating this process-based product online. And with these fine people who have thrown themselves into it, not being versed in experimental theater per se, but being amazing collaborators. So that's part of what I wanted to touch on. James, please help me out.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of the past, present, future structure that we had done an earlier version of this project that did not have that, like a test version that didn't have that, the past and the future. And simultaneously, we had been kind of having these back burner conversations about maybe doing a different project. And we were thinking about the sort of looking at how we got where we are and thinking about the like West Coast kind of whole earth catalog origin of where we are now, and thinking about people like Stuart Brand and John Perry Barlow and the whole earth catalog to the whole earth software catalog to like Steve Jobs to where we are now, and thinking about this history that I think is coming to people's attention now, and the Times just did this big piece about Stuart Brand, but like this history of kind of libertarian, like white West Coast idealism that, from one perspective today, maybe like curdles into this mistrust of government and kind of, it's one of the paths that gets us to like Twitter and where we are now and social media and maybe what's wrong with it in a way. And that was all kind of a different project. But when we started thinking anew for this production about setting it in context, as you say, that seemed really natural to start thinking about early internet and those kind of visionaries of the early internet and kind of framing the moment. And I also think that the moment that we're in right now with the internet is hyper commercial, right? Everything on the internet is monetized and it's like about money. And in some ways money is like it's either celebrated or vilified wherever you are, but you can't debate that that's like the core of what the internet is right now. And I feel like it wasn't supposed to be this way. There was this idealism around the internet, around what it could do culturally as opposed to like commercially. And so that's part of the framing structure. And I think we all have, it's not a single, didactic, message-based thing, but I mean, we have feelings around this because we have lived through these times and we see where we are now. And also, I think that's part of why the future section is kind of a lark, because of course, we don't know what the future is going to be. As you said, we can like deal with the, what's in the air right now and sort of speculate and have fun with it without tying ourselves to a prediction.
That reminds me of something I saw go by on Twitter a couple of months ago, saying Web 1.0 was, you can use this to have fun. Web 2.0 was, you can also use this to make money, and Web 3.0 is you can only make money with this. And so that that transition I think is interesting. I'll say of our breakout room, I guess let me back up even and say the breakout room piece of this, where a bunch of the audience went into rooms with the individual Turkers, was fantastic. That felt like cashing the check that experimental theater wrote 50 years ago on audience participation. No kidding. Because
I grabbed that quote, Clay. That's it.
You're welcome to it. So almost always audience participation has that kind of blue man group. There's somebody awkward up on stage. There was that beautiful audience participation thing where they did a sort of live action version of Point Break, and the Keanu Reeves character was always somebody drawn from the audience on the ground that only an audience member could be as bad a performer as Reeves was in that movie. Like those kinds of things that rely on the anxiety of public performance. But I will say, so I don't know what it was like in other rooms. I was in the room with Noel, but he was such a gracious host, and so obviously dramatically more competent at that activity than any of the rest of us, that it really, the skill gap that's always there with audience participation was part of that room, but not in a way that it didn't make me self-conscious, it made me interested. And there was somebody in our room, Gigi, who got 100% on all the Turker tasks. I think I managed like 87%. So she was way ahead of us. And in the sort of group chat towards the end, she said, "This really gave me anxiety." And I think we all felt that, because there was that whole sort of list of tasks, and you'd click on a task and it would obviously be both trivial and dumb. And yet there was this sense of like, oh, I should try to do this. Like you get put in one of those situations and it's an almost automatic response of like, I should work on doing well instead of badly in this situation. And that to me was something, I mean, you alluded to this earlier, Marianne, when you said we're not doing the cherry orchard on Zoom. Like we're trying to find something in this medium that we've all sort of gotten used to that feels both respectful of the live nature of it, which is always part of theater, but also feels respectful of the mediated nature of it because we're all on the screen. And I just, I don't have a bigger point to make maybe than just to say that I love that, and that being in the room with someone who was both competent and calm at the tasks that we were trying to work our way through was just a kind of experience I've never had in a performance before, and it was really interesting.
That's great. Yes, Noel in particular is very competent and calm and very gracious. And yeah, I mean, all the Turker rooms are amazing because you're in dialogue with an expert while you are struggling, as a complete novice.
Right.
And I can't believe you thought the heads were done, because we spent so much time on those things. So anyway, no.
I should not. So let me take that back and say many of them had the kind of like, this was a pointless exercise to measure you for. So I don't mean uncared for. I mean, they were making the point that Noel also made in describing them to us, that they were like the penny tasks that you all talked about in the beginning, sort of tiny tasks whose main point is to see whether or not you will stick with something while you're working through it, in order to raise your reputation so that you can get larger tasks.
That's right. Yeah.
They felt like it felt like an obstacle course, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's easy enough to look at an obstacle course and say, I don't have to do this. And yet you all borrowed the fact that I'd shown up for a performance, so I was kind of already engaged. And we all sort of dived into it. And I think, Gigi expressed this, sort of surprise that I think all of us had, which is, wow, that was actually a surprisingly like, raise your heart rate kind of activity for something where I'm sitting there clicking a mouse and looking at a screen.
Yeah, that is so funny. I mean, listen, I think it's also specific to New York. Like I sit here and watch New Yorkers doing it and they're just sweating, they're sweating balls. They can't bear to lose. And that's the point of that reputation ranking on screen. is to make you very, very aware that you are
Which you
being.
did, which you absolutely
Yeah.
did.
So it's torture for New Yorkers in particular.
That's
But
hilarious.
and that's a selling point with the show, I think. But also, I mean, I think you're putting your finger on the affect of it, which is meant to be anxiety producing, and meant to produce also the kind of like, I want to use the word stupid, but I guess frustration in the process of this kind of labor. So the attention checks are something that are exhausting, and you have to do them constantly. And if you miss an attention check, then you have failed the task. So there are those kinds of things, in addition to dealing with some of these tasks that are banal to like quite complicated. But, you know, and so the through line is though that there are these little pricks of like having to pay attention, of this kind of nervous energy.
Are you breathing right now? Yeah. And if you
Are you
answer
dead?
no, then
Are you dead? That's my favorite one.
Right.
But while you're trying desperately to keep your reputation afloat. So yeah, it's that the tension is part of the project.
Yeah. And I felt like just the kind of casual asides from the Turkers, like at one point, the advice came through, no writing task is ever worth the time you put into it. Right? If someone asks you to write even 200 words, this is the advice we got. If somebody asks you to write even 200 words, it's just not worth it, because it's long enough that there's an editing piece and you worry about typos and run-ons and whatnot. And that's clearly not spelled out in an Amazon handbook. Like that's just kind of the hard-won knowledge that presumably you get from doing this long enough to be, you know, to have a degree of expertise at it.
Yep.
And that also, like it was clear that the Turkers were comfortable enough in that environment that there were any number of things that they could have been helping us do or walking us through in terms of those tasks. You know, is this the same or different objects kinds of things, that I got the feeling for any one of the, I don't know, there was like 16 or 18 sort of human intelligence tasks, we could have gotten a little disquisition on how you approach it and whether it's worthwhile and how you sense it. And we also got a little look at the obviously wildly imbalanced relationship between capital and labor in this whole thing, because there were just some casual references to like, oh yeah, you can get blocked and reported. And I forget exactly the language, but it was very clear that there was an absolutely one-sided relationship between the people issuing and managing the results of these tasks versus the people actually taking them on and performing them. And that was clearly part of what you all were sort of describing in the hits of sort of this very odd working environment. But I could have listened more to what it's like to actually try and avoid getting slammed or getting your reputation damaged from a client who is probably not giving very much thought to something that you were doing as part of your livelihood.
Yes, I think we should definitely welcome our Turkers to speak to that. And in terms of, being able to fight back, you can't. But, Sybil runs a forum. There's a system called Turkopticon that's about rating the requesters. And so people are sharing information about requesters all the time. Right. So, and it's fascinating. We could get these guys to talk about this. So I don't want to put them in a position of absolute powerlessness, but there is something that happens quite often, which is you turn in your work and it can be rejected and you don't know why. So then you can try to, seek recourse and get in touch with the requester. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but really that initial impulse is what we were looking for, which is the sort of absurdity or the absolute sense that you're not going to be able to control what happens on the other end.
And also presumably at the amount you're paid per hit, between a penny and, $5 for a really valuable one, any big investment in your time to try and understand why work was rejected is very quickly pushing your hourly wage right back down. And presumably that at least is in part to get people to, take the hit, no pun intended, and move on to the next thing without fighting back, because fighting, essentially takes time away from the time in the system you could be making money. So it's, and it's interesting. Again, I remember all these conversations when Mechanical Turk appeared. There was an early project, 10,000 cents, where someone scanned a $100 bill, broke it up into 10,000 pieces and paid people a penny to sort of do their own custom sketch of each piece and then reassembled the sketches. And the American and Dutch participants in that, they came, they did one sketch and they left. It was a complete novelty. But there were people in Egypt and Brazil who were logging on frequently enough to make some real money from the project. And just accidentally, the project wasn't even designed to fund this, but just accidentally, the kind of differential interest people had in doing these jobs entirely tied to what a good hourly wage was in the local economy was a big part of the early conversation about Mechanical Turk. And then that conversation also went away. And then now here it is back again, and hearing from all, the range of people you have participating in this is super interesting. And, James alluded to the whiteness of the early internet, where the rationale was you don't have to have race or gender or sexual preference, as if getting rid of your identity was going to be a blessing. It was fascinating to see the sort of range of people you got involved in the Turk piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And I think on many of these issues, it has been a long process, and we've been lucky to be able to work with and listen to the Turkers as we kind of go through this. That we had certain ideas about what this system meant or how it worked that turned out to be untrue, and the project was long enough for us to learn from them and kind of put some of our earlier thoughts about it in context or correct them, whatever, add depth to them. And I think also it does tie into a little bit this idea about markets being inherently good, so Amazon is like the person who's running the casino. Like, on the one hand, there's the requesters, and on the other hand, there's the force of labor producing hits, and Amazon is just taking their percent no matter what the hell happens, inside the marketplace. And it's been an interesting conversation, because there's people who come in from a labor background that only want to talk about this as exploitation, but at the same time, Turkers have told their own stories, and I'm sure they'll want to say more about this, but about why this work is good for them and why it works for them and why it works better for them than some other options of work, and so in a sense, I think we felt like we wanted to try to contextualize what we were depicting and also kind of get out of the way and let people speak to those issues themselves and let them have a say directly.
And how did you all find or audition or hire the Turkers? Because this is obviously a hybrid of performer, collaborator, and worker in the way Builders relates to the people involved in the performance. Like, what was it like to navigate that?
Sorry, ironically, we posted a hit on Amazon and invited people to be in touch if they were interested. So it was all full circle, the snake eating its tail, but also meant to use the marketplace or subvert it. And Sybil, so let me just quickly say hello to Sybil, Noel, and Michelle, hi. And Adah might turn her camera on at some point. So you know what, guys, we've been talking so much. I want to hear from you, but I wanted to say, so Sybil and I connected. One of the earliest hits that we posted, and she said that she had been in drama in high school. Isn't that right, Sybil? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're like, it's a marriage made in heaven.
Well, I joined the drama club because I got free parking for my pterodactyl, and that was the only way you could have your dinosaur on school grounds.
Wait, but weren't you in a play or two?
I was in a bunch of plays.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And I was also in ballet 500,000 million years ago. And we've known each other forever.
Pretty much at this point.
Yeah.
So Sybil, do you want to say a little bit about the forum and the relationship to requesters? Because I didn't want to put words in you guys' mouths.
I have a good relationship with most requesters. I do a lot of work offsite. I mean, there's some requesters I have worked for years and years and years. One of my favorite requesters, I went to their website the other day and they said they post like 50 of their hits a month or a year on MTurk. And I'm like, bitch, I did that many this month for them. And I checked and I had.
But you've also gone back to requesters who rejected your work and found out why, right?
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
I will go
Yeah.
Karen in 3.5 seconds flat if I get a rejection. I get like one step from, do you know who I am? Because like 99.88 something % of all requesters on MTurk says I'm pretty fucking amazing. So what's wrong with you?
And Sybil, we were talking earlier about the sort of time invested divided by money earned. You feel like that's a good use of your time to go back to the requesters rather than just say, oh, those people were jerks and I'm going to move on to something more, something.
Oh, hell yes, it's a good idea to go to the requesters. Always. Always. Because 99% of requesters do not want to reject you. Sometimes it's an accident. Sometimes it was truly just a mistake on their end. I learned a long time ago, if I see something that seems weird in a study, I'll actually screenshot it and then I'll message the requester and explain why I answered why I did.
Yeah.
Gosh, I guess I've gotten most of my rejections overturned.
Right.
Sorry. Isn't the other reason that it's so important that because rejections are weighted so heavily
Yes.
versus approvals, right?
Yeah, it takes 2,000 approvals to get over one rejection, not just approvals.
Yeah.
And if you freak out like a lot of people do when they get a rejection, what'll happen is you'll just start getting rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. I've told people before, hey, why don't you just step away from MTurk for a couple of 3 days and then reapproach it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Adah, Michelle, Noel, anything to add? I mean, I do know that we've talked quite a bit about, let's see, I guess that initial feeling of like when your work is returned to you and you don't know why, or sometimes that your work is taken and you're not paid for it. I'm not sure how often that has happened. I know that it's part of the landscape, but what's your experience?
I know every once in a while there'll be a new requester that comes, and then you see like on the forums, a lot of people are rejected by that requester. Like sometimes it's kind of like they're a thief. Like they came on with the intent of rejecting everyone and just getting free information.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that that's an average requester. But I would say that I was at like a 98% and I recently got back to 99%. And I do notice a difference.
Oh,
Really?
Just,
But
just
But I'm not so sure about the 2,000 approvals or rejections because I'm at 99%, but I have like 130 something rejections, but I only have 14,000 approvals, but I'm back in 99%. So that would contradict the 2,000 approvals. It's like you need like a few hundred. That is true that you need way more approvals than rejections to get back, but it's not necessarily 2,000.
I can't even remember where I read that about the
Right.
2,000. It's something that has gone around Turk forums
Right, right, and-
forever. I know
right, and I
you
believe
think
that
people,
too.
I
At the
know
time,
you
This
it's
reminds
like-
me a little bit of
about
like,
it.
why didn't my Instagram post get more engagement, right? Like
Right,
the algorithm is a mystery and they're probably changing the algorithm all the time.
Sure they are.
And,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, we're just sort of all left to try to figure out the best way to work
right.
within it.
But there is like a certain mod to it, but I think it depends on the person who wrote that. They would need 2,000 more to get to 99, but they kind of said it as if it was everyone. But no, it depends on how many hits you have approved.
Mhm.
That would determine how
And
much more
see,
you need.
like I have so many more than everybody else here that the only reason I even notice a rejection is because it's in a whole different column on the dashboard and it hurts my feelings. I mean, it barely moves my number.
Right, but like I said, at the beginning of MTech, probably like for the first year, I didn't even pay attention to rejections or any of that stuff. I didn't know about any of that. So I guess I just got lucky that my rating never dropped low.
I guess you're good at your job.
Right. And I was
And-
completely oblivious. I didn't even know that you could go to a requester about rejections. I didn't even know how to message them.
And I'll say, you know, to Marianne's point about the job, just as an audience member, it was clear that all four of you are just super competent at this. And it's always interesting to be around people who are good at something. I wondered as an audience member, what the performances feel like to you all. Like, do you feel like it's a performance or that you're showing up for a job? Or how did you think about, you know, Saturday at 5 o'clock, all of a sudden you're logging in and getting ready to interact with these people?
It really didn't feel like a job because a lot of the people in my room were pretty interactive. So it was actually pretty funny, like watching people.
It depends on who shows up in your.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm a performer by nature. So it was fun for me. I live in New York. You know, I always find something fun to do. So it didn't feel like a job for me. I just told everybody, just welcome to my life, you know?
Noel, what were you gonna say?
It's more like a performance. It's not. It doesn't feel like work at all.
Nice.
You were saying it depends on sort of who shows up in your room.
If they're going to be talkative or not.
Yeah.
Now that can be kind of a job trying to convince people
Right.
to be interactive.
I was in your room Sunday at 5,
And you caught
and
me off guard when you were actually talkative.
and so was Gigi, which I thought was she was the one who said this gave me anxiety while she was racking up 100%. Does that happen a lot? Do people talk about after they get through the experience, the audience gets the experience of doing the task? Do they talk about it making them feel anxious or weird a lot?
There's some in the chats occasionally, but
Right.
I've had people in my room like almost get panicky.
Yeah, I've seen you talking people down, Sybil. But I
Yeah,
also think that's-
it's like for some reason in every group I've always had one that I'm like, oh, got to bring him back from the ledge. We taking this shit way too serious, Mike. There's no real NFTs. You're not really getting any
Right.
money. Chill.
right,
I
but
love dropping in on the rooms and seeing that, and also seeing there's always somebody who, you know, our four Turker colleagues are doing a great job of trying to put people at ease and get them to talk and, you know, bring them out. And there's always somebody who's like, leave me alone. I'm trying to concentrate.
Giving you
No
stink
one's
eye
looking.
when you're trying to help their ass. And it's like, fine, go ahead. You get 500 rejections. I don't even care now.
They
Now
won't
it's,
even look up at the camera. They just,
right. I'm like,
Right.
so if this was the real MTurk, how would you be? Because this is really nothing at risk, nothing at stake. So if there was, how would you be?
And I always like to screw with mine by telling them, now on top of all this, you got a power bill due by Monday and today's Friday, and you've got 57 cents in the bank. Better pick it up, baby. Because last week I really was going through that. And then that's scary as hell when you're not getting an hourly. I mean, this is my full-time job.
Right.
Yeah.
And for me, the little thingies is just like hanging out. Because I've got 2 working dogs. I'm used to talking all the time and nobody responding.
How variable I only went to one performance, you all have been to all of them. Like, how different are the audiences that end up in your breakout room, sort of one performance to the next?
completely different.
Yeah.
One time there'll be nobody that speaks at all the whole time. The next time there'll be somebody who's very animated, gives you thumbs up and thumbs down anytime you mention their name. And then the next time, everybody who's paying attention, talking to you and talking back. It's completely unpredictable, which that can be kind of nerve-wracking too.
For me, my audiences were pretty consistent, except for the last performance. Like the other performances, people were pretty good at talking and interacting. It was like the last one, it was a little bit of pulling teeth.
This was Sunday night.
Yes.
I've had a couple that, like, for whatever reason, I like clicked with somebody really quick. And then that stupid pop-up comes up. There's, 2 minutes. And I'm like, go the fuck away. We're having fun. Oh, shoot. I'm a widow and I live so far out in the country. Sometimes I go weeks without physically talking to somebody. Lots of text messages.
And Sybil, by physically, do you mean on Zoom?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that physical has now come to mean this during the pandemic, as opposed to just a text message or email back and forth or whatever.
You city folks are so cute. Dude, I have lived like this for over 15 years. I've not driven a car in over 12.
Wow.
I live like 25 miles from the nearest city. See, everybody thinks country's the suburbs. I have to return cows to people.
They wander up your road.
They come in my yard.
But I do want to say, just back to the performance question for a second. No, sweetie, I just, I think the thing also that's quite virtuosic about what these people are doing is, as you know, Clay, the worst part of theater is getting out there and being on the high wire and not having any net and just being like, I'm going to keep talking and hope that something happens. And so you guys have kind of been immersed in the most difficult thing to do in performing, which is you don't have a script, right? You're not playing a part. You're really improvising in this very charged space. So that's an amazing kind of performance.
And there was a thing that happened in the intro where the interviewers felt more scripted in a way that was distancing than listening to the 4 of you Turkers talk. Like Mo, the performance I saw, Mo said in that kind of late night talk show host way a couple of different times, working all the angles. And I didn't know if that was a standard line or if she just happened to have used it both times the night I saw it, but it made listening to the 4 of you seem more, not, not more rehearsed, but more direct than the kind of the people who were there as, more formally performers. You all in that section were kind of in the role of like talk show guests, and then there were the two hosts, and like that contrast was really interesting too, even before we got into the breakout room. So
I mean,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
I was just going to ask Marianne, how improvised were the interviewer questions and reactions relative to the things the Turkers actually had to say?
Yeah. Well, we're trying to cram a ton of information into this section.
Yeah.
Sort of subliminal. So subliminally, and this is I think it bowed to James's writing that it does sound natural, because I mean the part where we're setting up the Turkers to talk about themselves, they're not scripted, but we are, and so we're trying to sort of create different containers. James, do you want to say something else?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, I mean, the thing is, it is based on conversations, so it's that process where we had a lot of conversations and we talked a lot, and Mo and David talked to everyone here a lot. And we were kind of taking notes and trying to figure out like what was important and what we wanted to get across and what order it should maybe go in to make sense. And there were earlier versions that were a little more rambling and conversational on both sides. And we started to feel like we wanted to tighten it up, and we wanted to get a lot of information across in a pretty short period of time. And so we felt like it was, that was a choice to make half of that conversation clip along, and maybe it's a little artificial, but it's also like necessary to just have an online show that's 45 minutes and not an hour and 40 minutes, which also seemed necessary.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is this is all artificial on some level. If you're doing Zoom, you start with mediation as your basic, and I'll say in the educational world, we're dealing with this too, where live doesn't mean interactive and asynchronous doesn't mean one way, and everybody's kind of puzzling through what it means to learn things online. If you can interact with your faculty member over email, or you can watch a video of them that's completely canned. And many years ago, Marianne, back when years began with the one, Marianne and I worked on a show where there was a section where people read out loud from books that looked like it had been completely scripted, but was in fact rebuilt and improvised every night. And then there was a section that looked like utter chaos that was choreographed to the second. And if you'd asked anyone in the audience, their perceptions of what was going on stage would have been the opposite of what was actually going on stage. And I got a little bit of the sense of that in that the inversions around the interview section as well.
Yeah.
I want to say it's so funny, or not funny, interesting to hear you talk about how tough getting used to like Zoom and things like that was for you. I've been doing this over 10 years. We've all seen hits where you've got to use your camera, where you've got to use audio. Some of the best paying hits track your eye movements via your camera while you look at a website. Those have been around for well over 10 years, well over 12 years, because I've been Turking almost 13 years. I sat down and figured that up for you last night, Marianne.
Oh, thank you.
And some of the off-platform hits will have you doing Zooms about different topics or like interviews and stuff. So yeah, I've already been on Zoom because of MTur.
That's interesting. So this was all background tools and techniques for you all when COVID hit.
Yes.
That's interesting.
This was not new to anybody here.
Right.
I'm one of the rare weirdos that COVID actually improved my life, because before COVID, I lived so far out in the country, the only delivery was USPS, UPS, FedEx, whatever. Well, when everything locked down, we finally got Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Instacart. Do you know how amazing that is for somebody that does not drive?
Right.
That's
That's it.
amazing.
See, that was amazing. My neighbors were home, so their stupid dogs got kept up. It was great.
That's amazing. So then the audience that came in, many of us did, a little video conferencing or whatever before Zoom, but, moved our lives into this medium then. Let me, what was the most, for the Turkers, and I guess particularly in the breakout rooms, what was the most surprising or funniest thing you saw happen in any of the performances so far? Is there anything really, somebody behaved in a really unusual way, or something happened that just seemed like, oh, that's, sort of a 1 in a million occurrence?
I had one lady take that shit so serious, she broke out in a sweat and her face was all squinty and she was all up on her phone. And I was like, baby, calm down. Seriously. And she was at like 80%. I mean, shit, wow. That surprised me, was how seriously some people took it.
One thing that happened outside of the performance that was really profound for me was we, after we had been working on part 1 for a little bit, which was about, BBS culture, we were like, we better show this to, our collaborators and see, just so they know that there's going to be this weird thing that's happening. And Noel was like, oh yeah, I had a BBS. He was totally in the culture. Yeah. And it was so great to circle back and be able to really put that in the project. And, Noel, I don't know if we would have been able to touch on that otherwise. So that was wonderful to get that level of information out of you.
Yeah, it's interesting just thinking about it. In fact, the people I talk about, that we got together on Zoom for the first time since chatting back in the 90s.
Right.
We're gonna have a meeting on April 7th. So.
My God. And so you saw each other for the first time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, the one gentleman I've seen his picture on Facebook, but not the others.
Yeah.
And Noel, you said you started using the net in like 93, 94, something like that?
1994, yeah.
Yeah. So just before the web came along and sort of took the wind out of the...
There was an ISP called Prodigy.
Oh, yes.
I remember here. And I just remember the graphics were like an ancient cartoon. It was so awful.
Yep.
And I don't
Was
remember.
Prodigy also the one that was like a star, the logo? Maybe
I
not.
just remember the black and yellow color. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And after that was CompuServe.
Right.
And I think I mentioned once before that I finally got America Online. That's when there was actual chat rooms. But all the chat rooms, all they wanted to talk about was Star Trek.
Oh, there were chat rooms where they were not talking about Star Trek, but you had to go looking for them. So
well, you had to avoid the bad ones, but
yeah, it was one of the things I remember from those days, and it came out a little bit in the first section with you all sort of panning over all that old computer equipment, is that, with CompuServe, computers are in the name and so on. The idea was, the idea that was sort of circulating at the time is everybody who got on the net was going to become a geek, that everybody was going to care about how the technology worked and go deep into understanding it and all of that. And AOL was the first service to come along and say, we have to make this so easy for people that they don't know how their modem works. And AOL really, like, you could buy a computer magazine at a magazine stand that had a CD with it, put it in your computer and be online, or actually in early days, a diskette even, and be online in 5 minutes with not a lot of hassle. And that was the beginning of, oh, for this to work, it has to be easy enough to use that you don't have to understand the nuts and bolts of it to get online. And it was interesting how much the sort of part in those scenes where you panned over in section 1, how much the old hardware was part of the presentation. And by the time you're in the metaverse, you're inside the hardware. You don't see it at all.
Yes, we enjoyed reading about Radio Shack. Radio Shack was a big part of that early life,
Oh, yes.
right?
For me, that's, that I was that geek, like in high school, like I convinced my parents to, order a modem, and I didn't exactly know what it was going to do, and had that experience of getting online and calling BBSs like in Westchester, which is where I grew up, and sending messages and getting back for the first time and sort of seeing it. And yeah, it was like, right. I mean, I was that geek, and that stuff has like a texture. There's like a nostalgia to that, like that awful, putty color that like all the computers were at the time. And me and my friends used to go to the IBM store in White Plains and get thrown out, because they were trying to sell like business machines to people. This is like in the Charlie Chaplin era of like IBM, corporate salesmanship.
Right.
I have no where I'm going with this, but it just, I throughout that whole, working on this project, I've had this like, oh yeah, that, I keep remembering things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that color you mentioned, that was the first computer we ever had was a Tandy for 1991 or so.
Yeah.
That color you mentioned, that's what stands out the most.
I think that's the color plastic is when you don't put a color in it, which tells you how little the people making those things cared about computers. Like Johnny Ive basically saved Apple by making computers that had colors in the cases. Like when Steve Jobs came back there, the company had almost gone, they had like 6 months of cash left. And the huge innovation was just to make a computer that looked like humans had eyes for anything other than the screen.
You y'all poor abused, mistreated babies. I was spoiled. My first computer that my grandpapa bought me for my birthday was a Blueberry EMAC, the one that was clear at the back.
Oh yeah.
That Steve Jobs said, "Don't you just want to lick it?"
Yep.
That was my first computer.
That's that. Yeah. And Sybil, didn't you say that the computers you're using now were things that you bought and repaired?
All of my computer gear, even to my monitors, were bought non-working. They were liberated, and I saved them, and now they love me.
Very good.
My
It's like a revival tent.
My very newest piece of tech is I have the original iPhone SE that I still use every day.
And Michelle and Adah, what are you all using?
Well, I'm using 2 computers
iPhone 12.
and my Android.
Oh, interesting. So you've got one of each kind of phone. And Adah, you went for the phone first. Did you use that more than the computer, or?
Oh, I'm on a MacBook Air talking to you guys now. I'm kind of like Appled out. I'm like, no, Apple's not getting any more of my money right now.
Well, they're coming for you with the subscription, I think. So
right, I literally just bought an iPad like 2 weeks ago.
I'm one of those people that like, I have a chair in my living room, but I have 2 desks.
And you just roll it around and.
I never have company, but I use 2 computers and too many monitors.
I have to say, seeing Adah hold up her phone and hearing Michelle talk about her phone, I also love the fact that you all made a 2-screen performance, that it really felt, it didn't feel like you were trying to turn the box of the laptop into a proscenium, but that you were saying, here are these 2 different ways we're interacting, and being able to force the browser to update along with the script was really interesting, because the interaction with the phone was pretty minimal until suddenly it was maximal, right? Until suddenly it was like, oh my God, I got to do these hits, and I don't know if I should do the lower ones that raise my reputation or the upper ones first or whatever. And that I think was really interesting because since the iPhone, right, the experience of the internet is so fractured across multiple screens, but so many people trying to do something theatrical online still try and concentrate on a single screen like it's
proscenium.
yeah, exactly.
Well, for real, I've heard of a lot of new Turkers that their phone is their only way to Turk.
Yeah, that does not surprise me at all.
A younger person, because I know so many kids now that don't use a computer. All they have is their phone.
Yep.
But for me, I use like both daily. Like sometimes I have like YouTube videos playing on my phone whilst I'm doing work on my laptop. And then sometimes I have something on my iPad over to the side. So I'm like a multi-screen person in general.
Yeah, that's one of the things we were thinking about, is how that's how people even like watch TV now. Is like, here's everything is multi-screen. And we should give a shout out to Larry Shea, who appears in the show and is our second screen designer. And also we worked with Larry on a phone app for the Elements of Oz, our previous production, which was also at Skirball. So we had that experience of combining the proscenium with the second screen before we came to this experience of combining Zoom with the second screen.
Right. Interesting. I remember, again, many years ago, saying, you think about sort of Marianne's and my association pre-Builders, we worked at a company that had TVs on stage always, and I forget when Worcester Group added TVs on stage, but there they were. And in particular for the show that she and I worked on most intensively together, which was The Three Sisters, much of the acting was delivered, someone on stage interacting with someone on a TV. And then there was this vogue for putting TVs on stage elsewhere in the theater world at the time, but people almost always looked for some rationale or setting that would explain why there was a TV there. And Chris Condick, who did video with Marianne and I at the time, said, those people don't understand that in America, you never need a reason for there to be a TV in the room. Like, it's just not something you need to explain. And I feel like what you all did was to say, you don't need to explain why there are two screens. Like, there are always at least two screens. And we're just going to take that for granted and design for that rather than kind of make it a big deal, which I really appreciated.
That's true. That was the, as you know, the medium is the message. Which is why we kind of end in VR, because we're very interested in that space, how that's being colonized by Mark Zuckerberg and other white men, but also how labor is being pulled into that space, right? And that was the connection with Turking and online labor now, and what kind of work we'll be doing in Meta. James spent a lot of time exploring the offices where you can sit at your computer in real life, but also be in the meta space on your computer. So, those layers of mediatization and labor, I think, are just starting to be unpacked.
Right. Let me ask maybe one last question, Turkers, because I know we're at time, but seeing the metaverse stuff in the show, or just what you all may have seen of it elsewhere, do you all have any curiosity or interest in that kind of VR immersion, or are you happier with the sort of multi-screen version of the internet you're currently using?
I'd really like to experiment with it.
Yeah, I would kind of say that if you had like a Wii, like I think that would have been like some immersion into like a metaverse, because like the handles, you could actually feel the vibrations, and it was like you were really doing it. I think that game was kind of kind of an immersion into it. And now
Oh.
you have the VR headset, so it's like a full-on thing. Because they still have like nunchucks for some of the games, so you get like both. You get the visual, and you actually get to feel like you're in the game.
That whole meta stuff reminds me of like Second Life or this other one called IMVU that I used to play with my kids because they were in it. And, you know, I had to spy and shit because I'm just that awesome. It just, the only difference is that there's a voice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get the allure.
And
Like I play a lot of the like NFT and metaverse games, even though a lot of them use VR headsets. But I know that that's the appeal for a lot of people, gaming and also speculation. That's
Yeah.
really why people are doing it. Because they want to get the NFTs, hopefully be able to sell it for more later on. So really the audience right now is around gaming. I do know like a few people who started like companies. Like I know someone who started a company called MetaDrip, and he's like creating clothing, like NFT clothes for you to use in different games. So like people are starting to have jobs and companies in it. And of course, anyone who knows like programming and coding. But for the everyday average person who doesn't know about coding and isn't interested in games, I still don't really see much for them there.
right. And Noel, you were
But-
saying you wanted to experiment with it?
Well, I've tried a VR headset once. My problem is they're so expensive.
Well,
It's a big investment. And what if you don't like it? You can't really send it back. So, but watching David and Mo at the ends as they walk off, with the paddles in their hands, that's, it really makes you think that I wonder if it's something I could use. It's been very tempting.
Like I think if they do like the concerts or even like sporting events, that would get more people into it, like virtual reality sporting event where you can actually be there at the game, but from your home. So it's more immersive than just watching it through a TV.
And Michelle, are you at all interested, or have you played with it, or?
Yes, I have played with it. But again, for me, it's just for the game part of it, not for business, And because I'm a person of a certain age, I'm not going to really see many people my age doing that type of stuff. They don't even like getting on Zoom. So younger generation, yeah, maybe, but not for my generation.
Thank you.
It's so funny you mentioned the guy that's doing the clothing line for the meta thing. That I used to give my kids their allowance with a $5 gift card for IMVU because you could buy clothes and shit.
Yeah.
So why is like the NFT like $1,000? And my kids like had banging wardrobes for $5.
Yeah.
With the NFT, it's like you own it versus with the IMVU owns it. So with the NFT, you get full control of it. You can send it to different platforms as long as it's compatible. You can sell it to other people versus IMVU. You can only use it on IMVU and they own it. Versus NFT gives you ownership over the article of clothing.
Adah, we're gonna have to continue this conversation for our next show.
I need you to explain it to me.
The suspicious nature of NFTs.
Right.
Jumping into the metaverse, for part 3, just definitely felt like we were just getting our feet wet with this. Yeah. Interested, skeptical, all kinds of things.
I truly don't understand any of it. I've even read up on it, and
it's a lot.
It's a lot. And the issues that Adah just raised about whether it's ownership or whether it's a pointer to ownership. There's a woman who does this sort of TikToks basically, in which she's trying to explain something that she doesn't At one point, she explains, for instance, the M dash, the little piece of punctuation, but her best one is trying to explain NFTs while not understanding them exactly. And at one point she says, it's not ownership, but it represents ownership, which I think is the best gloss of the sort of difficulties of thinking what you actually get for your money when you put it down for an NFT.
That's
So,
perfect.
yeah.
Oh, so it's exactly like my iPhone SE box that I kept. It represents ownership, but it's not the actual phone.
It's not the actual phone.
Whoa.
It points at the phone.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Well, love talking to you guys. I'll see you at Showtime tomorrow.
And thank you all for the performance on Sunday. That was really a treat. I really enjoyed it.
Well,
Yeah.
Clay, thank you for
Thank
being
you.
interactive. It made it a lot easier.
Good. Well, of course, I was happy to be in your room.
Yes, you were a model audience member, Clay.
I'm going to take that line.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jay, for organizing this. And to be
Thanks,
continued.
Noel. Thanks, Michelle, Sybil,
Yeah.
Adah.
Thank you. I'll
Thank
see you
you all.
tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.